Yeah, I do. Based on everything he has said over those previous two press conferences, the one where he fired Chip and the one where he introduced Doug Peterson, he made it very clear. I don't know how anybody could come away from those press conferences and not think that he wanted to bring in a coach who was not like Chip Kelly, to the point that he volunteered during that press conference the other day that he had begun researching other head coaching candidates while Chip was still a head coach, even before, presumably, the Eagles were going to play the Redskins on that Saturday night, where if they won the game and won the following week against the Giants, they would be in the playoffs. I mean, think about that. The Eagles were still a viable playoff team, and Jeffrey Lurie was looking to see if there was a way for him. He'd begun the process of getting out from under Chip Kelly, and that says something very profound about where Jeffrey Lurie was with Chip and how much longer he wanted him to be there, which is to say he didn't want him there much longer at all.
Yeah, so, Mike, I mean, a lot of people surmise that there was a rift between Kelly and Roseman that was not repairable. But do you kind of look at it and say there was a rift between Kelly and Lurie that was not repairable?
I think both are true. I think, look, if you're Jeffrey Lurie, let me put it this way. Jeffrey Lurie, when he handed power to Chip Kelly, basically set things up in a way where he was saying, I'm giving you power so that when you screw up, I'll be ready to replace you. That's basically what he did by keeping Howie Roseman in the organization in a position of relative power, not consigning him to a broom closet, not firing him outright and removing him from the building, but keeping him in the front office. As he said himself, it was to keep Chip accountable. So, okay, Chip, you get your shot, but when it doesn't work, or if it doesn't work, you're out the door. Now, look, Chip did not have a good year from a personnel standpoint. They had a lousy year all around. They go 7-9. But that's not how you run an organization. That's especially if you're bringing in a guy like a Chip Kelly who has a reputation of doing things his way, of being unconventional. If you're going to take that route, then you've got to give the guy, and you give the guy what is everybody seems to think is total control, you've got to give it more than 1 year. You can't back out of it when things start to go bad. And I would argue that Lurie set up conditions so that it was going to go bad no matter what, because you had Howie Roseman in there, whispering in Lurie's ear at every opportunity. And once it went bad, then boom, it's gone.
Mike Sielski is with us, Philly.com. What do you think about the Gamble stuff? Because, yes, do you believe Kelly when he says, I just want to coach, and that when Gamble got let go, that he trusted Roseman so little that he had to force himself into that role even though he didn't want it? Do you buy that?
I'm not sure totally that he didn't want it. These are all football coaches. They all think they're geniuses. They all are power hungry to one degree or another. I think it's more likely that if Gamble had stayed there and been a kind of buffer between Chip, that Chip might not have made that power play. And we'll see what happens in San Francisco if they have any kind of success and Chip's esteem is built back up again because he's winning games. We'll see if he makes another power play. But I do think it would have been less likely for Chip to ask for everything and basically use the leverage that he had at that time had Gamble remained in place. Remember, at the time, Kelly had all the leverage. He was the genius. He was the guy changing the game. He was the guy who had won the 20 games over his first 2 years after the Eagles had been 4-12 in 2012. Lurie at that time couldn't let him go. The problem was that Lurie really didn't have the courage of his convictions. He had hired Chip, but he really didn't want to go all in on Chip. So he keeps Howie Roseman around, and as soon as it goes bad, after 1 year, Chip's out the door.
If the Eagles played on Wild Card Weekend, are we having this conversation about Chip Kelly, the San Francisco 49er head coach, and Doug Peterson, the Philadelphia Eagle head coach?
That's a really, really interesting question, Mike. I don't know the answer to that. If they had made the playoffs by going 8-8, and let's say they get bounced in the first round, even though they're hosting a playoff game, maybe they play the Seahawks and they get their clocks cleaned. I wouldn't have been surprised seeing how Lurie has reacted publicly to the firing and justified the firing, it wouldn't have been surprising to see Chip replaced anyway. I just don't. I think the relationship was from Lurie's standpoint beyond repair. He wasn't willing to live with Chip's way of doing things, whether it was the mistreatment, I guess you could say, of people within the building, the way he didn't build relationships, the divisions within the organization, all those sorts of things. I think Lurie, in a twisted way, was kind of happy that they lost to the Redskins because it took the decision. Really, it took the decision, the difficult part of the decision out of his hands. He didn't have to decide whether I'm going to fire my head coach after he just won the division. The Eagles didn't win the division. They finished 7-9. They were 6-9 at the time Lurie fired him, with a game to go yet in the season. So if they got into the playoffs, I don't know what Jeffrey would have done.
Yesterday, Mike, Kelly, two comments that stood out from Kelly were really the alignment of the organization. He mentioned that, how the 49ers are aligned. And he mentioned on many occasions football guy, but he went out of his way to say Trent Baalke's a football guy and that he trusts him. Is that his little shots at the Eagles front office?
Oh, yeah. The passive-aggressive back and forth between Jeff Lurie and Chip Kelly, from one coast to the other.
3,000 miles
really
away.
Yeah, it's really kind of humorous at this point. I mean, that's absolutely what that was. I mean, that was the question when Lurie made that move a year ago and gave Chip, ostensibly all this power and, demoted Howie while still giving him a raise and keeping him around in the building, was that, Chip wanted a football guy and Howie is not a football guy. So, yeah, I don't think there's any doubt that that's Chip's not-so-subtle way of firing back at Lurie, just as Lurie has had his not-so-subtle ways of taking shots at Chip. Like, we didn't need a coach who was going to win the press conference. You have to have an open heart. You have to have emotional intelligence. All these things that apparently Kelly didn't have and that Doug Peterson does. I mean, they're all not-so-veiled shots at the coach Chip was with the Eagles.
I want to know how Chip Kelly was here for 3 years. There's 85 media members who cover that team, and we just found out his dog's name yesterday.
Well, here's the thing, Mike. Chip didn't give one-on-one interviews to anybody during his 3 years here in Philadelphia. Nobody got that kind of one-on-one time with him. And, in one sense, it's great in that, amongst all these competing media entities and reporters, everybody's on the same footing. He's not leaking stuff to somebody else. He's not, doing a sit-down with this reporter but not doing a sit-down with this other reporter and playing favorites. Mm-hmm. But the flip side of that is that you never really got to know the guy unless you were willing to stand up there, right? And unless you were willing to shout out in a press conference either during the week or after a game, "Hey Chip, do you have any pets? And if you do, what are their names?" You were never getting the answer to that question.
Yeah, I think I heard Merrill say that. He's the play-by-play guy for the team. I mean, you figure he said in the 3 years he said he sat down with him one time. I thought that was unbelievable, and I guess it kind of displays where Lurie, I guess the word was, he wanted his team back, and I guess those type of things started to add up, regardless of how many wins and losses that was going to catch up to him. Ultimately, similar to the situation that happened in San Francisco, a place where he is ironically at where Harbaugh was.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, there's this old line from a movie. I think the movie was Dog Day Afternoon, the old Al Pacino movie, about a hostage situation at a bank. And there's a scene in the film where the police chief's trying to defuse the whole situation. And the mayor of the city comes up to the chief and he says, "Chief, whatever you want to do, I'm with you as long as you're right." And the chief looks at him and says, "If I'm right, sir, I don't need you." And that's basically what, that's in a nutshell is the situation with a guy like, Chip Kelly or Jim Harbaugh. The owner is going to be with you as long as you're right, as long as you're winning. And that was what Harbaugh was doing for the first 3 years he was with the 49ers. That's what Chip did for the first 2 years with the Eagles. And once they stopped winning and once the whole structure started to deteriorate, the owners wanted to get out from under those guys. And, I would argue in the Eagles case that given that you're a franchise that hasn't won a championship since 1960, more than 55 years, Maybe it's time. Maybe your culture isn't the one that needs to be changed. maybe Chip, as bad as it might be and as rough as it might be, maybe in time his is the one that's going to win out and get you where you want to go. I'm not suggesting that this was a good team this season. I'm not suggesting that Chip Kelly did a good job as a head coach and a player personnel director in 2015. I'm suggesting that giving up on that after 1 year shows you were never really all in with him anyway. So, why did you go through the machinations of hiring him to begin?
He's Mike Sielski, the Inquirer columnist, at Mike Sielski on Twitter. Always kind enough to jump on board. Really good piece on the 3,000-mile battle between Lurie and Chip Kelly. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Mike. Have a good one.